We like to think of history as this story that's all figured out, right? But what happens when the evidence, the stuff they left behind, tells a completely different story? One filled with impossible buildings, forgotten sciences, and artifacts that just shouldn't exist. Today, we're going to look at some of those cracks in the official story. We've all heard the stories of how the great wonders of the ancient world were built. Simple tools and a whole lot of human muscle. But when you really stop and look at the sheer scale, the incredible precision of it all, you can't help but wonder, is that really the whole picture? Or are we missing a huge piece of the puzzle? So, here's what we've got lined up for you. We're going to dive into some of history's biggest puzzles. We'll start with some spooky, unseen forces, then we'll tackle the absolutely mind-blowing construction of the pyramids, check out a wild theory that could change everything, and then do a quick tour of some other artifacts from around the world that just don't make sense. All right, so let's start not with some huge ancient monument, but with something a lot closer to home, and honestly, for a lot of people, way more terrifying. We're talking about a force that seems to pop up right in the one place you're supposed to feel safe, the poltergeist. Okay, so the word poltergeist, it literally breaks down to noisy spirit in German. And that's really the key thing to remember here. It's not your typical ghost that just kind of floats around silently. A poltergeist's whole identity is about making a racket, making noises, moving things, basically causing physical chaos. And here's the creepy part. According to paranormal researchers, these things don't just happen out of the blue. There's often a pattern, a chilling progression. It might start small, with just a weird feeling in a room or a strange smell, but then it moves to whispers, voices when no one's there. Then things start to move on their own. And from there, it can ramp up to deliberate acts designed to scare you. And in the worst cases, it can get straight up aggressive and physical. And you might think this is all, modern horror movie stuff, but no way. People have been documenting these encounters for centuries. You've got the drummer of Tedworth back in 1661 in England, terrorizing a family by throwing furniture around, or the super famous Bell Witch case in the US in the 1800s. The stories are all over the globe, and they're shockingly consistent over time. So what in the world is going on here? Well, there are basically two big camps. You've got the paranormal explanation, that it's spirits, demons, some kind of entity, but then there's this really fascinating psychological theory. It's called RSPK, which stands for Recurrent Spontaneous Psychokinesis. The idea is that it's not a ghost at all. It's a living person, often a teenager going through some intense emotional stress, who is unconsciously making all this stuff happen with their mind. They're projecting all that inner turmoil outward. So the agent isn't a spirit, it's a person. Okay, but let's zoom out, way out. We're going from mysterious forces moving a chair in a bedroom to the kind of force it takes to build on a scale that changes the world. We're talking, of course, about the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Right, so the official story. We all learned it in school, right? That millions of gigantic stone blocks, some heavier than an SUV, were painstakingly cut out of quarries, dragged for miles and miles, and then hauled up these enormous ramps by thousands of workers. And somehow, they set them in place with a level of precision that would be a serious challenge even for engineers today. I really want you to think about this number for a second. 2.5 tons. And that's just the average block. Some of the granite beams inside weighed up to 15 tons. And the Great Pyramid has something like 2.3 million of these blocks. The sheer effort, the logistics, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And that's exactly why some people are convinced there has to be another explanation. But what if that whole story, that whole incredible effort is based on one wrong assumption? The assumption that the stones were cut and lifted. What if the ancient Egyptians weren't just masters of shaping stone? What if they were masters of creating it? That's the whole idea behind the concrete pyramid theory. Yeah, that one question just flips the whole problem on its head. Think about it. Instead of an impossible problem of physics, quarrying and lifting millions of tons of solid rock, it becomes a problem of chemistry. What if workers just had to carry buckets of a wet, concrete-like mixture up the pyramid and pour it into molds? Right there on site. And they say there's actual physical evidence for this. Take a look at this. This is a piece of a block from high up on the Great Pyramid. That surface doesn't have the marks you'd expect from a chisel or a saw. Instead, it has this distinct, woven pattern. Proponents of the theory say that's a perfect impression of a reed mat that was used to line a wooden mold while their artificial stone was hardening. And it's not just the pyramid blocks either. Check this out. On the left is an unfinished statue of Nefertiti. See that line running right down the middle of her face? That's a classic seam line, exactly what you get when you cast something in a two-part mold. On the finished statues, like the famous one on the right, that seam is just polished away. It really suggests they knew how to cast hard, stone-like materials. So what is this magic recipe they supposedly used? Well, today we've called it a geopolymer concrete. And the recipe was surprisingly simple. You just take limestone, which is pretty easy to crush up, and mix it with a simple chemical binder. Stuff like natron, lime, and water, all things they had tons of. You mix it into a slurry, pour it in a mold, and a chemical reaction turns it into an incredibly hard artificial stone that's almost impossible to tell from the real thing. Okay, so the pyramids are obviously the big one, but honestly, they're just the tip of the iceberg. All over the world, you find these things that just don't fit the timeline, objects and structures that seem way too advanced for their time. Let's head to Bolivia, to a site called Puma Punku. The stonework here is just unreal. You're looking at these massive stone blocks with perfectly straight edges, surfaces polished smooth as glass, and complex interlocking shapes. It's the kind of precision that would be tough even with modern power tools, let alone the Bronze Age tools they were supposed to have. Then you've got these little guys from ancient Colombia, the Quimbaya figurines. Now, officially, these are supposed to be insects or birds, but I mean, just look at them. They have upright tail fins, stable wings, a fuselage. They look an awful lot less like birds and a lot more like little airplanes. And then there's this thing, the Baghdad battery. It's a 2,000-year-old clay jar, and inside is a copper cylinder and an iron rod. If you pour in something acidic, like grape juice, it produces an electrical current. It's a simple battery, 1,800 years before the battery was officially invented. What were they using it for? We have no idea. All right, so we've gone from noisy ghosts to concrete pyramids to ancient airplanes. What are we supposed to make of all this? Well, it kind of leaves us standing at a crossroads, doesn't it? Right between the story we've always been told and the story the evidence seems to be telling us. I think this quote just nails the central problem here. On one side, you have the official history, the one built on years of research and agreed upon by experts. But on the other side, you have these actual physical objects, these artifacts that seem to whisper about forgotten knowledge, showing us that what was actually possible thousands of years ago might be way beyond anything we currently believe. And that's really the question I want to leave you with. What's the better witness to the past? Is it the history books, which we know can be lost or changed or biased? Or is it the silent, stubborn stone and metal that's been sitting there for millennia, challenging us to figure out how it even exists? The answer to that, well, that could change the way we see everything.